Jews, we all can learn from this amazing, amazing gift that Aaron was given. God never separates us from us. No matter how impure a person has been or is, it never is an excuse to give up. There's always where to grow from. Every single little addition that a person adds. Okay, good evening. This week we are reading two parashiot for the last time in a long time. We are finishing this week the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra, and we're finishing off with the two parashiot of Behar and Bechkotai. So we're going to start off with Behar, this week's parasha being Behar, and right at the beginning of the Torah portion, of this week's Torah portion, it says as follows, and I'll quote. We're in chapter 25, verse 1. It says as follows. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Behar Sinai lemor. The only time that we find in our entire Torah that God is speaking to Moses from Mount Sinai saying. So first of all, what's he saying? Well, let's see the next verse. The next verse says as follows. Ki tavo el haaretz, when you come to the land of Israel, asher ani noten lachem, that I've given to you, v'shaveta haaretz shabat ladonai. Let the land rest. Well, when? The next verse tells you, the third verse. Shesh shanim tizra sadecha. 6 years you shall plant and plow your land. V'shesh shanim tizmor karmecha. And those same 6 years you will prune your trees and work the land as proper. Ve'asafta et tevu'ata, and you will gather all of its produce. And then following that says, but on the 7th year you shall not work the land. So we have a lot to talk about in a short amount of time, but we're going to get to the bottom of this one way or another. So the first thing we're going to speak about is the correlation between Har Sinai and the mitzvah of Shemitah. Shemitah, as we just read, is the obligation that those that are living in Israel and occupying Israel and using the land to produce its agriculture and its crop should every 7 years give the land a break, give it a rest. This is likened to the human being. The human being needs a rest at least once every 7 days. Once in a while we need more than a rest. So we have Shavuot coming up. We got 3 days straight. We have sometimes a full 7 days like Pesach or Sukkot. We have partial days like Rosh Chodesh and other days. Chanukah, Purim. But the land needs no more than 1 year for every 7 years. In modern science and agriculture, they have also come up with the concept. They didn't come to 1 to 7. They came with different calculations for different types of fruits and vegetables and different types of grains. But they also understand the importance of giving the soil a rest to rejuvenate itself, to produce a better product for the farmer and for the consumers. There's different ways and different methods that they use. One of the methods is if you take a circular method and you split up the land into 3, and then every year shift one side over. That's one method of doing it. Yet the Torah says all the land should be worked 7 years straight, 6 years straight, and the 7th year all the land should not be worked at all. It's in order to give it strength and rejuvenate. So why does the Torah tell us that God told this to Moses at Mount Sinai? Wasn't everything told to Moses at Mount Sinai? He was up there 40 days and 40 nights, more than once, and 24/7 for those 40 days. He was learning, no eating, no drinking, no sleeping. God was giving it to him straight. No. So the Torah says, no, this one is Behar Sinai. It's the most famous question on this parasha. A lot of the commentaries go for it. We're going to quote Rashi, who quotes the Midrash, and says, so that one will not come and think that every law and intricacy and detail of our Torah was not given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. The Torah took Shemitah, the mitzvah of resting that 7th year for the land, and told us that the same way, like this law, this commandment of Shemitah was given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai, so to all the laws in our Torah, all 613 and all of the thousands of derivatives and their millions of details, all came directly from God to Moses, where? At Mount Sinai. So this is what Rashi says. I'll add, as other commentaries add, they also say, so that no one would come and make a mistake and think that only the 10 commandments were given at Mount Sinai, everything else is, God forbid, man-made or something else. In order to secure the minds of the Jewish people and the world for that matter, to know that all of the Torah was given to Moses by God at Mount Sinai, Shemitah was selected as an example. To that, the Zera Shimshon asks the question we are all asking ourselves at this very moment: why was Shemitah selected? Why wasn't Tefillin? Why wasn't Ve'afta l'reacha kamocha, love your fellow as yourself? Why wasn't any other mitzvah? I mean, we got out of 613, so 10 of them are the 10 commandments. So you got another 603 commandments to choose from to make an example out of it. And you know which one they choose? The Zera Shimshon asks. Shemitah. And you know which one they choose? They choose one that's not applicable for the next 40 years. They were in the desert traveling for the next 40 years. So even if you want to choose Shemitah, it's not applicable for now. It's not even applicable for that generation. We know that whole generation got wiped out. Why Shemitah, he asks, makes no sense. So listen to the fascinating interpretation the Zera Shimshon gives this evening. He quotes a different midrash to tell us that there are unique and specific parallels that can be drawn between Mount Sinai and the mitzvah of Shemitah. He gives two of the examples the midrash gives, and he elaborates on it. The first parallel that the Zera Shimshon gives is that when one observes and keeps the commandment of Shemitah, they will be blessed that they will not be exiled out of the land of Israel. They are spared from exile and granted freedom. As we know, the reason why the Jewish people were exiled was, one of the main reasons was because they did not observe this mitzvah of Shemitah. Shemitah is every 7 years. If we calculate the time between the exile after the destruction of the first temple and the returning and the rebuilding of the second temple, was exactly 70 years, 7 times 10, alluding to for the as many times that they missed on keeping their Shemitah. So there's a clear correlation between exile if you don't keep Shemitah, or freedom and enjoying the land of Israel when keeping Shemitah. Look at Har Sinai. If anyone would be asked, when were the Jewish people to be proclaimed as free? So some will get up and say, well, after the first plague already. After the first plague, it was evident the Jewish people had the omnipresent, the Almighty fighting their battle, they're free. Others will say, no, maybe only by the 10th plague. Others will say, no, when they left. Others will say, when the sea split. And others will say, when they emerged from the sea. And others will say, when they beat Amalek at war. But you know what the true answer is? It's when they came to Mount Sinai. When the Jewish people came to Mount Sinai and they received the Torah, that's when they became truly a free nation. Now you may ask why. The answer is because until they got the Torah, they could have just been another nation escaping an oppressor. And furthermore, The whole point of the Jewish people receiving this blessing of Exodus, God's whole plan of taking the Jewish people out was twofold, was giving them the Torah and bringing them to the land of Israel. So before they even received the Torah, they were not free. They were still, I hate to say it this way, pagan in some way, barbaric, slave mentality, until they received the Torah. Receiving the Torah gave them a structure as an individual, as a community, economical, with the law system, interpersonal relationships between the relationship and them and their own creator. That's what makes an individual free. And to that, at this point, when they stood at Har Sinai, is when they were spared from exile and given their exodus and their freedom. So for that reason, the Zera Shimshon, this is the first parallel he makes. The parallel of exile versus freedom between Shemitah and Har Sinai. Okay? Listen to the second parallel he makes through the Midrash. The Midrash tells us, the commentaries all cite it, that one who observes the mitzvah of Shemitah will be blessed with ultimate blessings and even a large amount of prosperity and livelihood and parnasah. And where do we see that from? Well, later on in the Torah, in this week's parasha, it says, and what are you going to do if someone comes and asks, what am I going to eat in the 7th and 8th year? Because if we make a calculation, okay, so I'll work years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Very nice. If I'm working, that means we're having produce coming. I'm able to take it, eat, sell, trade. Very nice. What's going to be on year 7 and 8? 7 because I'm not working it, and 8 because even if I start working right away, it doesn't happen in 2 seconds. It's not going to, in 1 day or 1 week or even 1 month, start giving me the produce. So the Torah says, what do you answer such an individual? Say, don't worry. God promises one who keeps Shemitah will have a triple blessing on the 6th year. Why triple? Triple. 1 for year 6 to eat, and carry over to year 7, and carry all the way through to year 8. When year 9, which is really 2 of the next cycle, by then your land will be ready and already giving its produce and its crop. So we see that there is a tremendous amount of blessing, physical and monetary blessing to one who keeps Shemitah. What do we see by Har Sinai? The Midrash tells us that when the Jewish people came to Har Sinai, they were blessed with all blessings. They were blessed in a physical way, in an emotional way, in a spiritual way. We'll give a couple examples for each. I'm sure we could all think of them ourselves. With an emotional way, as it says, Ish Ehad Belev Ehad, they all came as one. They became one person. They loved each other. They all had one goal, to accept and to hear the will of God. Spiritually, can you imagine any greater spiritual experience than listening to God and receiving His Torah first-handedly? And even physically and monetarily, the Yehudim who lived in the time of the desert were blessed that they had no issues of parnasah. They didn't have to do laundry. They didn't have to make or buy clothes. They didn't have to hunt. They didn't have to plant. They had nothing to do except for go and collect their daily man's worth of food, vizehu, and that is it. They were blessed in every way possible. So the Zera Shimshon says, look at the Midrash. It gave us 2 parallels between Shemitah and Har Sinai. The first parallel, that both of them spared from exile and gave freedom. And number 2, both of them gave and gives a tremendous amount of blessing in all spectrums to those 2 concepts. And he says, for that reason, Shemitah was singled out. Even though it's not being observed for the next 40 years, and even though it's a random out of the other 603, look at the strong parallel that the Midrash draws, that the Zera Shimshon explains in such a beautiful way. If we go to the second and third verse in the Torah portion. Let's read it, and the Zera Shimshon asks two powerful questions. He says, the verse says, Ki tavo'u el haaretz. Is tavo singular or plural? It's definitely plural. Okay, the land that God will give him, let the land rest. The next verse, Shesh shanim tizra sadecha. 6 years you shall work your land. Is that plural or singular? Singular. So 1 second. Why is the storyline changing? Are we talking singular or plural? Are we talking to the whole nation? Are we talking to individuals? It doesn't really matter, because even as an individual, it could be to each and every one. If it's to everybody, so then it's everyone together. But don't start switching on me. Don't go plural to singular or singular to plural. Keep it all in the same tense. God, you created grammar. You wrote the Torah. You formed the vocabulary and the language of Hebrew. Stay consistent. If not, there must be a reason why it's not. So Zera Shimshon asks that as question number 1. Question number 2, he asks, when it comes to the laws of Shemitah, the only thing we know of is the commandment to let the land rest every 7 years. Yet, in the third verse of this week's Torah portion, it seems like an individual has an obligation to work for 6 years. Where do I see that? Well, it says, Shesh shanim tizra sadecha. It sounds like 6 years work, 7th stop. So what's the mitzvah? Is it just stopping like we know it? Or is it 6 years working and then stop? And maybe if you didn't work your 6 years, did you fulfill the mitzvah of stopping on the 7th? Well, how does that work? So they seem a little unrelated, yet look how he ties it together. He says, in the future, and when he means the future, he means to say in the time of Mashiach. The time of Mashiach, let me give a little introduction. The time of Mashiach is something that many have a misconception of what it's going to look like. The basic understanding of what the Mashiach will look like is very similar to the world we live in. It's not a spiritual world, a fantasy land, or lights and olam haba the way we understand it. That's not the times of Mashiach. Mashiach means God has revealed himself to the Jewish people and the world at large, and every single creature and being knows that God is the creator of the world, the one who runs the whole world at every moment of creation. And because of that knowledge, every single creature is going to want to only do for God. So the Jews, the children of God, the ones who kind of bought in beforehand, or any righteous converts who bought in beforehand, well, they're the children of God and they're able to serve God directly. But the nations of the world, and even the animals and vegetation and everything of the sort, will not be able to serve God directly. They will only be able to serve the children of God, the chosen nation, the Jewish nation. This is the way our Chachamim explain the times of Mashiach will be. What's the example? It's like you're trying to get close to a king or a president or a ruler, but sometimes it's very hard to get direct access. So what do? You go to their children, you go to their closest advisors, and you try to pay them off or act nice to them in order to get to the next step. The same thing is in the time of Mashiach. In the time of Mashiach, only those who are already the children of God, the chosen nation, will be able to be directly serving him, and the rest will only serve that nation, the Jewish people. Saying this, with this introduction, now the Zera Shimshon says, in the future, the Jewish people will not need to work their land. There will be no reason for them to have to plow and plant and all the rest that will have to do with agriculture. More so, the Jewish people will not need to work. You won't need to have your day job. You won't need to be a doctor. You won't need to be a practicing lawyer, accountant. There won't be work. All of your needs will be provided to you by others. By who? Like we just said, by all vegetation, animals, and the other nations of the world. Because their service to God will be to us, for us to fulfill our purpose. So we won't have to do anything. Now, he takes a step further. He says, even in the time when the Jewish people occupied the land of Israel, the righteous ones did not need to work their land for a livelihood. It was done on its own. Their parnasa came from God, and everyone had their different arrangement. Some people owned fields and it ran on its own. Some people didn't own fields and they had food and parnasa brought to them one way or another. But that was only for the righteous. I'd like to clarify there's a difference between tzaddikim and hasidim. Tzaddikim are righteous individuals, people who follow the letter of the law. That means what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, and that's fine, and I've done the right thing. A Hasid is someone who goes above the letter of the law. That means even if we have a dispute and I was proven to be in the right, I go above the letter of the law. I don't pray within the time zone of prayer. I pray the earliest and most opportune time to pray. And there's many, many other examples of what the difference between a Hasid and a Tzaddik is. But the Zera Shimshon says, even only tzaddikim, only, like we can aspire to be tzaddikim and that would be great. Chasidim is the next level. Again, being righteous and then pious. Okay? He says the righteous ones that lived in Israel, they didn't need to work their land because they were righteous and God took care of their financial needs. So now he spins us back to our pasuk, answering the second question first of, so do we have an obligation to plant or not plant for 6 years? Answer is yes. To those who their livelihood is not taken care of for them because they're not at the level of a tzaddik, they need to work. Don't rely on charity. Don't rely on the community fund. Pick yourself up, learn a trade, pick up a shovel, a rake, go pick your fruit, do whatever it takes. Don't fall on the burden of the other Jewish people. But why was it, going back to the first question, why was it starting in plural and then ending off in singular? Because the whole obligation of keeping Shemitah was given to the whole Jewish people. Now the majority of them were tzaddikim. They didn't have to work their land. So therefore, in singular, shesh shanim tizra sadecha, who's that talking to? It's talking to the individuals who had to work because they were not at the level of being righteous enough that their work would be done for them. So just in case I got a little too twisted on that, let me just repeat. We asked, it's going from plural to singular, and then it seems like there's an obligation to work. Answer is, it started plural because it was talking to the whole Jewish people, don't work on 7 years. It moved to singular to tell you, for those singular individuals, the few and far between who had to work the land of Israel because they were not tzaddikim gmurim, complete righteous individuals, they need to work. They need to work and not let their burden fall on others, rather be as self-sufficient as possible. A fascinating way and insight into the mitzvah of Shemitah and the blessings that came along with it and the deep understanding of where the Torah was going with what it meant on saying. I'll just mention a quick moment on the concept of tzedakah. There's many different types of charities that a person can give. There's charity that a person could give to the state of Israel, to the IDF, to local schools, synagogues, food banks, poor people, kolelim, yeshivot, to name a few, and I'm sure there's even more. All of these causes are very worthy. I will not say anything against them, chas v'shalom, because they're all people who are really trying for the hardest. But we have an obligation to make sure that our tzedakah is the best bang for its buck. Let's put it that way. Like when you make an investment, you want the investment to do the best for you. You have $1,000 to invest. If you invest it one way, you can only make $1 a year. Other ways, you can make $100 a year. If you're very good, you can maybe make $500 a year. And the numbers are unlimited. So when we give our tzedakah, when we give our 10%, where is the best bang for its buck? So, first of all, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch give a detailed order of precedence to where tzedakah should go. We're not going to get into that deep now. One day we will. We've done it before. We'll do it again one day. But I want to just skip on to the concept of giving and helping poor people. I'll be the first to say that those who are unfortunate and those who need help definitely need to be helped. But we have to help them in a smart way. I'm just sharing my heart with you, and I don't have a perfect solution, but maybe the more I share my heart with others, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take everyone's good thoughts and something will come out of it. We know all the famous saying of don't give someone fish, rather teach them how to fish. Unfortunately, when we help those who are needy and are living in poverty, they become completely dependent on the asking and the requesting and the laziness of not going to work, and we're doing them the greatest disservice. Yet, again, I pour my heart out. If you don't help them, it could resort to chas v'shalom, starvation, death in an extreme case, or robbery or murder. Chas v'shalom. So it's a very fine line, and this is only God Almighty who could help those who distribute tzedakah to poor people, of knowing how much and how often to give to those who are asking and are in need, enough to help them from a tragedy, but enough not to handicap them. And to that, every person, including myself when I'm faced with the challenge of deciding who and how to give, always needs to turn to God and say, Hashem, I'm your messenger. Please help me give, and give to be helpful and not to clip wings and to handicap. It's very, very hard. And that's why when large amounts of money are given to people who are in need, they need to be given the right way, the right time, through the right paths. When it comes to giving towards other greater organizations, normally there's a lot of eyes on it, and there's a lot of opinions, and there's a lot of control on how and where that goes, that it's normally going to the right place. But when it's going to poor people who are asking, I think, in my own opinion, it's the only case where it could do damage, sometimes more damage than good. So again, I'll say, we need to make sure to give to those who ask. We need to give to those who are living in poverty. Lo alenu, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless that there are no Jews living in poverty. Chachamim tell us if every Jew would give their 10%, there would not be one poor Jew in the world. And they'd have enough to do their own business and make their own parnasah. So may that not be our challenge, but there is that challenge in the Jewish world. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless us in the merit of the Zera Shimshon and the merit of all of our Torah study and our good deeds and our good intentions, that the right amount gets to the right way, to the right people, which help them and build them up in a stronger way. Yezrat Hashem Yitbarach.